It was just another normal night in Pasadena. The streets were empty, save for the occasional car passing by. The streetlights flickered as the wind rustled the leaves of the trees lining the sidewalks. The quiet hum of the night was soothing, almost reassuring, as the city nestled under a blanket of stars. The moon hung high above, casting long, eerie shadows along the pavement. It was the kind of night that felt ordinary, almost comforting, like nothing could possibly go wrong. Maria, a college student staying up late to finish a project, was oblivious to the shift in the air around her. She sat at her desk, hunched over her laptop, the glow of the screen illuminating her tired face. Her small apartment, tucked in a quiet corner of the city, was bathed in the soft artificial light of her desk lamp. The world outside seemed so far away. The occasional sound of passing cars barely registered in her mind as she focused on her work. She had planned to finish her project tonight, or at least make significant progress before her final submission. The words on her screen blurred together, but her concentration was absolute, determined. She wasn't the type to procrastinate, not when it came to her grades. Yet as the night wore on, a strange feeling crept over her, something she couldn't explain. It was as if the air in the room had thickened, turning heavy, making her feel a sense of unease that she couldn't shake off. She pushed the feeling aside. It was just the stress, she thought. It was a normal feeling when you're buried in assignments and deadlines. She sighed, leaning back in her chair and rubbing her eyes. The clock on her wall read 2:14 a.m. Her friends had all turned in for the night hours ago. Maria was alone now, surrounded by the quiet emptiness of the apartment. The stillness of the night seemed louder than ever before, like the city had taken a collective breath and held it in. Just as she was about to get back to work, a sound broke the silence. It was low at first, almost imperceptible, like an animal growling in the distance. She paused, frozen, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. Was that a dog? She wondered, but it didn't sound like any dog she had ever heard. It was deeper, more guttural, like an animal in pain. She strained her ears, trying to catch the sound again, but it was gone. Maria shook her head. It was probably just the wind playing tricks on her, she reasoned. Or maybe some animal had wandered into the alley outside, scavenging for food. It wasn't unusual for the strays to roam the area late at night. She dismissed the thought and went back to her project, but the feeling of unease lingered. A few minutes passed, and Maria had almost forgotten about the strange noise when it came again. This time, it was louder, more distinct, and walked toward the window. With a hesitant hand, she pulled the curtain aside, peering out into the darkness. The street outside her apartment was empty, save for a few parked cars. their windows reflecting the faint moonlight. But something was different. The shadows seemed to stretch further, darker than they should have been, as if the night itself was growing thicker, deeper. The growling sound faded for a moment, but Maria's instincts told her it was still out there. She strained her eyes, scanning the street for any sign of movement. And then she saw it, a figure. At first, it was nothing more than a vague shape, shrouded in the darkness of the street. But as Maria focused her gaze, she saw it more clearly. It was tall, unnaturally tall, and its form was unlike anything she had ever seen before. It moved with an eerie fluidity, its body gliding effortlessly through the shadows, as if it didn't belong to this world. The figure was darker than the night around it, blending seamlessly with the surroundings. Maria's breath caught in. She couldn't make out its features, but she didn't need to. The presence of the thing was overwhelming, suffocating. It was as though the very air had thickened around it, making it impossible to breathe. The growl returned, louder now, reverberating through her bones. The figure moved swiftly, almost inhumanly fast, its long limbs stretching unnaturally as it disappeared into the alleyway, swallowed by the shadows. Maria's heart raced as she took a step back from the window, her mind struggling to process what she had just seen. Her knees felt weak, and she nearly stumbled. She pressed a hand to her mouth, trying to stifle the panic rising in her chest. Was she imagining it? Was it just her exhaustion playing tricks on her? She tried to rationalize what she had seen, but the fear gnawing at her was real. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The silence that followed was oppressive, like the calm before a storm. The city felt still, as if it too was holding its breath. Maria stood by the window for what felt like an eternity, her mind racing. She wanted to call someone, to tell them what had happened, but she didn't know what to say. How could she explain the unexplainable? How could she tell someone that there was something out there, something unnatural, something that didn't belong? And then, without warning, the growl came again. This time it was right outside her window. Maria spun around, her heart hammering in her chest. She rushed to the window, but there was nothing there. The street was empty, just as it had been moments before. She could hear the sound of her breath, sharp and shallow in her ears. Was she losing her mind? Was this just stress getting to her? But deep down, she knew that what she had seen, what she had felt, was real. Something had awoken in the city, something ancient, something that had been lying dormant for years. And now, it was free. Free to roam the streets of Pasadena. Free to hunt. And no one knew what was coming next. Maria closed her eyes, trying to steady her breath. But the chilling realization crept over her. The city was about to change forever. By the time the first rays of sunlight crept through the blinds of Maria's apartment. The weight of the previous night still lingered heavily on her mind. She hadn't been able to shake the image of that shadowy figure gliding through the streets of Pasadena. She kept telling herself it had been a trick of the light, or maybe just her imagination, worn thin by late-night studying. But deep down, she couldn't deny the growing sense of dread gnawing at her. Something felt horribly wrong. When Maria made her way to campus the next day, she noticed an odd stillness in the air. The usual hum of the city seemed muted, like everyone was holding their breath. She passed by students gossiping in small clusters, but instead of the usual chatter about classes or plans for the weekend, the conversations were all about the same thing. Strange occurrences that had been happening all over town. Missing pets, strange noises at night, shadows that seemed to move of their own accord. People were starting to talk, and while no one had concrete proof, everyone had a story. Jason, a local delivery driver, had seen it firsthand. He had been working the night shift as usual, delivering packages to homes in the older part of Pasadena. This area was quieter than most, the streets winding and narrow, with old houses that seemed to hold secrets of their own. Jason had made his way down a quiet street, the headlights of his van illuminating the darkness ahead. As he turned the corner, something caught his eye, a dark mist swirling in the middle of the road, thick and unnatural. It wasn't fog, it wasn't smoke, it was something far darker, like a shadow come to life. It hovered there, almost as if it were waiting for him. Jason's heart skipped a beat, his hands tightening on the steering wheel as he slowed his van. His headlights flickered, and for a moment, the mist seemed to pulse, as if it were alive. A cold chill swept through the air, creeping in through the cracks of the van's windows. Jason's breath became shallow, his eyes darting around, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. He was no stranger to late-night deliveries, but this was different. This didn't belong here. He slammed his foot on the accelerator, eager to drive past the mist and get to safety. But as he picked up speed, the mist followed. It wasn't just drifting or blowing with the wind. It was moving toward him like a living thing, as if it was intent on blocking his way. Panic set in, and Jason swerved the van to avoid the swirling mass. But it was too late. In an instant, the mist engulfed. Jason's breath caught in his throat as the engine of his van sputtered and died. The vehicle coasting to a stop in the middle of the street. The lights flickered, then went out entirely, leaving him in complete darkness. The air was thick, suffocating, and Jason's skin prickled as he tried to force himself to move. He tried to start the van again, but it was no use. The engine refused to turn over. It felt as if the mist itself was suffocating the life out of the vehicle. He reached for the door handle, but just as his hand touched it, something heavy slammed against the side of the van. His body jolted with the force, and for a moment, he thought someone was trying to break in. Panic surged through him as he frantically twisted the handle, but the door wouldn't budge. Something was holding it shut. A pressure, almost like a weight, pressed against the van, trapping him inside. Jason's heart pounded in his chest, his mind racing to make sense of the situation. He tried to shout, but his voice seemed to be swallowed by the oppressive silence around him. The cold in the van deepened, and Jason's breath fogged up the windows. His hands shook as he tried to open the door again, but it felt as if something far stronger than him, was holding it in place. Then, through the fogged window, Jason saw it. Eyes. Two glowing, blood-red eyes, staring at him from the mist. The eyes were wide and unblinking, fixed on him with an unnatural intensity. Jason's blood ran cold as he locked eyes with the creature. It wasn't human. It wasn't even animal. It was something other. The eyes seemed to pierce right through him, sending a wave of terror crashing over him. He could feel it, feel the malice radiating from the eyes, a hunger that sent chills down his spine. For what felt like an eternity, Jason was frozen in place, unable to look away. The air grew colder still, and the mist began to swirl around the van, faster and faster. He could hear the soft, wet sound of something moving through the fog. Something large, something predatory. The growl from the night before echoed in his mind, the sound now louder, closer. It was a low, guttural noise that made his blood run cold. Jason felt his chest tighten as he gasped for air, the panic threatening to choke him. What was this thing? What did it want? Just as quickly as it had come, the pressure against the door lifted. The mist began to dissipate, swirling away like smoke in the wind. Jason didn't hesitate. He threw open the door, stumbling out of the van, his legs weak from fear and the cold. His heart was hammering in his chest, but he didn't stop to look back. He ran as fast as he could, his feet pounding against the pavement, until he reached the nearest streetlight. Only then did he stop, gasping for breath, his body trembling uncontrollably. When he finally found the strength to make it home, he was covered in deep scratches, long, jagged marks that seemed to appear out of nowhere. His skin was raw and bruised, his clothes torn. But it wasn't just his body that was broken. It was his mind. He couldn't shake the image of those blood-red eyes, the terror he felt when he locked gaze with whatever it was in the mist. And the worst part?
He knew it wasn't just a nightmare.
The next morning, Jason barely had the energy to get out of bed. He couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. He could still hear the growl in his mind. And when he closed his eyes, the image of the creature's eyes haunted him. He swore to himself he'd never go back out there again. But deep down, he knew he would. Because whatever it wasn't done. It was still out there, and it was waiting for him. And the worst part, he wasn't the only one it was watching. A days in Pasadena seemed to stretch on endlessly, each one heavier than the last. It started with one or two isolated incidents. But as the nights passed, more and more people began to report strange occurrences. The growling noises that had once sent chills down the spine now seemed almost familiar, almost expected. But they weren't alone anymore. With the growls came whispers, soft, almost imperceptible voices that seemed to come from nowhere, echoing in the dead of night. Some people thought it was just the wind. Others convinced themselves it was the sound of creaking houses or distant pipes. But deep down, everyone knew that something was wrong. Something was out there. Something that didn't belong. The whispers were never loud enough to pinpoint, never clear enough to understand. But they were there, always. And as the days turned into weeks, the stories grew. The figure that had been seen in the shadows, the cold, the fear, it all became part of the terrifying legend that the townspeople had started to whisper about. They called it the Dark Entity, though no one truly knew what it was. Some said it was a spirit, a ghost seeking vengeance from the past. Others, more daring, believed it was something much darker, a creature that had been waiting for years to be freed from its prison. Some even said it was a manifestation of the town's collective guilt, a curse unleashed by a forgotten evil. Lily, a local waitress, was one of those who had heard the stories, but never really believed them. She had worked at the same diner for years, serving coffee to late-night customers. And while she'd heard her fair share of bizarre rumors, she always chalked them up to the wild imaginations of people looking for something to believe in. But that all changed one cold night in early October. It had been a busy evening at the diner, a steady stream of customers coming in for their late-night meals, their voices filling the air with chatter. Lily was used to it. She had served hundreds of people over the years, her routine so ingrained in her that she barely thought about it anymore. But something felt different that night. The air was thicker than usual, colder, and there was a sense of restlessness that she couldn't quite place. It wasn't just the cold breeze that occasionally swept in through the cracked back door, or the flickering of the dim lights above. There was something else, something that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. She was walking down the narrow alley behind the diner, a tray in hand, carrying the last of the dirty dishes to the kitchen. The alley was always quiet, a shadowy place that separated the diner from the apartment buildings next door. As she passed the dumpster, she felt it, a sudden chill in the air, the kind that you can't ignore. It wasn't like the usual fall breeze. This one cut deep into her bones, as if it came from someplace dark, a place that had no business being part of the real world. The night air felt thicker, like the very atmosphere had changed, become oppressive, as if it were waiting for something to happen. As she stepped further into the alley, she heard it. A voice. It wasn't loud at first, just a whisper, barely audible over the sounds of the wind rustling the leaves. Her name, Lily. It was soft, almost sweet, but there was something off about it, something unnatural. Lily stopped dead in her tracks, the tray almost slipping from her hands. She froze, her heart skipping a beat, and her breath caught in her throat. The air around her seemed to pulse, as if the world itself had suddenly slowed down. She turned around, quickly, looking behind her, but there was no one there. The alley was empty, just the flickering light above, casting shadows along the brick walls. But the feeling didn't go away. It lingered, hanging in the air like a weight. Lily, the voice whispered again, this time closer, as if it were standing right next to her. She whipped around, but again, nothing. There was no one, no figure, no movement. Just the empty street, the shadows stretching farther than they should have. She could feel her pulse racing in her ears. The whisper had been unmistakable. It was real. Someone, or something, had said her name. Her heart was hammering now, her breath coming in short, shallow bursts. She clutched the tray tightly, as if it might offer her some sort of protection, and began to walk quickly toward the back door of the diner. The hairs on her neck were standing on end, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't alone, that something was watching her. But then she heard it again, a low growl, deep and rumbling, coming from somewhere just beyond the alley. It wasn't the sound of an animal. It wasn't the wind. It was something more. A sound that seemed to vibrate through her very bones. She stopped dead in her tracks. This time, it was closer, much closer. She could feel the growl reverberating through the air, and for the first time, Lily felt the deep, terrifying weight of the fear that had been building in the town. Something was out there. Something dangerous. And it was coming for her. She turned the corner, practically running now, desperate to escape the sense of impending doom that had gripped her. As she rounded the bend, she stopped dead in her tracks. There, standing in the middle of the street, was a shadow. At first, it looked like an ordinary silhouette, just another figure in the night. But as her eyes adjusted to the darkness, Lily's stomach dropped. It wasn't like any person she had ever seen. The figure was tall, too tall, and its limbs were unnaturally long, stretching far beyond the length of a normal human. The shadow seemed to twitch, jerk unnaturally, and then it moved, slowly, deliberately, like it was stalking her. Lily's breath caught in her throat as she stood frozen, unable to look away. The figure seemed to be made entirely of shadow, a mass of darkness that shifted in unnatural ways, its body twisting and warping with every movement. And then, its face. Lily couldn't see it clearly, but she saw enough. A gaping mouth, wide and distorted, stretched unnaturally across its face, its edges jagged, like it had been torn open. It was a face that shouldn't exist, a face that no human could ever have. The growl returned, louder now, a deep, rumbling sound that echoed in the streets around her. Her legs moved of their own accord, and she bolted, running as fast as she could toward the diner's back door. She didn't dare look back. She couldn't. She could feel the shadow moving, chasing her, closing the distance. Her heart was pounding in her chest as she reached the door and slammed it shut behind her, the force of the blow shaking the building. She leaned against the door, gasping for breath, her whole body trembling. But when she turned to look around, the diner was empty. The customers had long gone, and the workers had already started cleaning up. No one had seen what she had seen. No one else had heard the growl, or the whispers, or the footsteps that had followed her down the alley. But Lily had. And the fear, that feeling, it stayed with her. It stayed in the pit of her stomach, gnawing at her, refusing to let go. The creature, whatever it was, had followed her. It was still out there, and Lily knew it wasn't done. It wasn't just haunting her. It was haunting them all. By now, the fear had spread like wildfire through Pasadena. What had started as whispered rumors, strange occurrences, and unexplained sounds had transformed into something much darker. People were no longer dismissing the strange events as superstition or coincidence. The entity, which had once been an unsettling presence in the shadows, had made its mark on the town in a terrifying way. Every night, it seemed to claim a new victim. It didn't matter who you were, what your background was, or where you lived. If you were out in the streets when the sun dipped below the horizon, you were at risk. The creature was relentless, its dark influence growing stronger with each passing day, and there seemed to be no escape. People began locking their doors earlier, keeping their windows shut tight, and even avoiding the streets entirely after dark.
But it wasn't enough. No one was safe. It was only a matter of time.
Tom, a local police officer, had seen his fair share of strange things over the years. Police work was never predictable, and the job often brought him into contact with the unusual and the eerie, from drunks to domestic disputes, from robberies to random acts of violence. Tom had seen it all, but what he was witnessing now was different. It wasn't just a strange occurrence or a freak accident. This was something far more sinister, something that defied reason. One night, as he worked the graveyard shift, Tom was called to investigate a series of disappearances that had recently plagued the town. The reports had all been eerily similar. People vanishing without a trace, often after dark, and with no signs of struggle. The most recent disappearances were near the old, abandoned church on the outskirts of town. The church had been empty for years, its dark, crumbling walls serving as a grim reminder of the past. It was a place people avoided, a location ripe for rumors and ghost stories. But now, something more sinister had drawn the attention of the police. Tom's patrol car rolled slowly down the dirt road that led to the church. The eerie glow of the headlights cut through the heavy fog that had rolled in off the hills. The temperature had dropped suddenly, and a chill had settled over the area, as if the very air itself had turned cold with anticipation. Tom felt uneasy as he turned into the overgrown lot, the tires of his car crunching on the gravel. The church loomed ahead, its broken windows staring back at him like hollow eyes. It looked abandoned, neglected, yet there was something about it tonight that made Tom feel like he wasn't alone. He stepped out of the car, his boots crunching on the gravel as he surveyed the area. His flashlight beam flickered briefly before settling on the building's decaying stone walls. The wind howled through the trees, carrying with it a sense of dread that Tom couldn't shake. The usual noises of the night, chirping crickets and rustling leaves, were absent. The silence was suffocating. As Tom made his way closer to the church, he heard something that sent a chill down his spine. It was a voice, soft, barely a whisper, but it cut through the silence like a knife. The words were chilling, like they had come from somewhere deep within the earth, somewhere ancient. Run. The voice was faint, almost too quiet to be real, yet Tom could feel its urgency. It wasn't a voice he recognized, but it was enough to stop him in his tracks. He stood frozen for a moment, trying to figure out where the voice had come from. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up, and his heartbeat quickened. His instincts screamed at him to turn around, to leave, but he couldn't move. There was something magnetic about the voice, something that held him in place. He took a step forward, his flashlight sweeping the area around him. But there was no one there, no person. His radio crackled to life, breaking the stillness. A voice, panicked and breathless, came through the speaker. "Officer Tom, we have a situation. Someone's screaming down near the church. Blood-curdling screams. We need backup." Tom's stomach dropped. The voice on the radio was frantic, the urgency unmistakable. He grabbed his radio, trying to steady his voice. "I'm on my way," he responded, his hand gripping the flashlight tighter. The cold air seemed to grow colder still as he began to walk toward the source of the scream. His boots crunched on the gravel, the sound amplified in the stillness. As he neared the edge of the church's property, the scream echoed again, louder this time. It was a woman's voice, full of terror, like she was being torn apart. Tom's blood ran cold as he sprinted toward the sound. He reached the spot just outside the church, where a small stone wall separated the property from a row of overgrown bushes. He shone his flashlight through the trees, scanning for any sign of the woman. But there was nothing. No body. No sign of struggle. Just the rustling of the trees in the wind. His heart raced as he turned in a circle, scanning the area, his breath coming in sharp bursts. What the hell was going on? The scream had sounded so real, so close. He moved toward the bushes, his boots crushing dry leaves beneath him as he pushed through the... Tom's flashlight flicked over the ground, and that's when he saw it. Footprints. Deep, heavy footprints that had been made recently. They led into the overgrown lot toward the crumbling church, but they stopped abruptly. The footprints didn't lead anywhere. It was as if the person had simply vanished, as if they had never been there at all. He crouched down to examine the footprints, his mind racing. There had to be an explanation. People didn't just vanish into thin air. Did they? But as he stood up, a strange feeling washed over him. The air felt thick, suffocating, as if the very ground beneath him was watching. And then he heard it again. Another growl, low and guttural, but much closer this time. It reverberated through the ground, rattling his bones. Tom froze, his eyes darting around the lot. The trees swayed in the wind, but there was no movement. The growl grew louder, and then came the whispers, soft, indistinct, just at the edge of his hearing. Tom's skin prickled with fear as he slowly backed away, his flashlight shining wildly as he searched for the source of the sounds. He felt like something was circling him, watching him from the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. The growl turned into a roar. An animalistic, primal sound that filled the air with terror. Tom's legs moved before his brain could register what was happening, and he ran. He didn't know where he was going, only that he needed to get away from whatever it was that lurked in the darkness. But by the time he reached the edge of the church property, the sounds stopped. The growls, the whispers, the feeling of being watched.
it all disappeared in an instant. The silence was deafening.
Tom stood there, his chest heaving, his mind spinning. What had just happened? What was out there? And why did it feel like the creature was watching him? The town of Pasadena had descended into a state of chaos. What had started as a few strange occurrences, whispers in the night, and a handful of missing persons had spiraled into something far worse. The darkness was no longer just an abstract fear. It had taken shape. It had a presence. And it was growing stronger every day. People locked their doors at dusk, avoiding the streets as much as possible. No one dared to venture outside after dark, and rumors of the creature that haunted the town were passed in hushed tones. It didn't matter who you were, how brave you thought you were, or how much you tried to ignore the signs. The fear was palpable. It gripped everyone in a stranglehold that seemed impossible to escape. But just when the people of Pasadena thought it couldn't get worse, a revelation came from the unlikeliest of sources. A frail, old woman known only as Granny May. Granny May was a fixture in Pasadena, living on the outskirts of town in a small, weathered house filled with relics of the past. She wasn't well known by most of the younger generations, but to those who had lived in Pasadena for a long time, she was a mysterious, almost mythical figure. Her long silver hair and wrinkled skin seemed to tell the story of someone who had lived 1,000 lives. And her eyes, piercing and intense, always carried a weight of knowledge that made anyone who crossed her path feel uneasy. She had lived through decades of the town's history, seen its highs and lows, and kept to herself mostly. But it was in this time of fear and desperation that Granny May finally decided to step forward with a chilling truth. A truth that would shatter everything the people of Pasadena thought they knew. It happened one evening as the town gathered at the local church, desperate for answers. The sense of dread had grown so heavy that even the bravest had begun to fear the night. There had been another disappearance. This time, an entire family vanished without a trace, leaving behind only an empty home and a town full of questions. The whispers had turned into outright panic. Some believed it was the work of the creature that haunted the streets. Others thought it was some kind of curse, but no one had any concrete answers. And then, in the midst of the growing hysteria, Granny May appeared. She shuffled into the church slowly, her cane tapping against the wooden floor as she made her way to the front. The murmurs in the room grew louder as the townspeople noticed her, some confused, others fearful. It wasn't often that Granny May made public appearances, and when she did, people listened. She had a reputation for knowing things that no one else could explain.
With a wave of her hand, she silenced the crowd, her voice quivering, but steady, as she began to speak. "I know what's causing this," she said, her voice low, but carrying the weight of someone who had lived through too many years of sorrow. "And I know how it began."
The room grew still, the people hanging on her every word. Granny May took a deep breath before continuing. "This creature, this thing that haunts your streets, it didn't come from nowhere. It wasn't born of chance. It was created, summoned, to be precise. Long ago, a group of dark cultists gathered in Pasadena. They were hungry for power, power beyond what any of you can imagine. They sought immortality, the ability to control the forces of nature itself. And so, they performed a ritual, a dark and ancient one." Granny May paused, as if the memories of the ritual still haunted her. Her eyes clouded over with a mixture of fear and sorrow. The cultists thought they could control the ritual, that they could harness the creature they sought to summon. But they were wrong. The power they tried to wield was far greater than they understood. They didn't summon a god. They summoned a beast, an entity born from the darkness that existed long before the town of Pasadena was ever founded. It was a creature of shadows, of fear, of pure malice. And when they tried to bind it, to control it, it broke free. A collective gasp swept through the room as people exchanged nervous glances. Granny May's words felt unreal, like a story that belonged in a nightmare or a forgotten legend. But the fear in her eyes made it impossible to dismiss her. A creature was bound to this town, to the streets themselves. It cannot leave, but it also cannot rest. It feeds on fear, on the terror that people feel when they know something is wrong but can't explain it. It hides in the shadows, biding its time. For years, it lay dormant, content to feed on the fear that simmered beneath the surface. It wasn't until recently that it began to grow stronger. The ritual had sealed it away, but it was never truly defeated. It was merely waiting for the right moment. Granny May's voice grew quieter as she continued, her words now hanging heavy in the air. And that moment has come. The room was thick with silence as the weight of Granny May's revelation settled over the people of Pasadena. The creature that had haunted their nights, that had stolen loved ones and whispered their names, wasn't just a random force of nature. It was the result of a long-forgotten ritual, a curse that had bound the town to a malevolent entity. But the question still remained. Why now? Why was the creature awakening after so many years of silence? Granny May seemed to read the question in the air. She looked up at the crowd, her eyes clouded with a sadness that only years of knowledge could bring. "I don't know what awakened it," she admitted, her voice heavy. "Perhaps it was the restless souls of those who have vanished, their spirits unable to find peace. Or maybe it's the sins of this town, sins that have been buried for too long, sins that have caught up with us. But I can tell you this,
The creature is hungry, and it won't stop until it has fed on every last bit of fear this town has to offer. The people of Pasadena listened in stunned silence. No one spoke for a long time. There was so much to process, so much to comprehend, and yet the terror was undeniable. They had all felt it. They had all heard the growls, seen the shadows, and sensed the presence that lurked just beyond their vision. Finally, one voice broke through the stillness. "Is there a way to stop it?" someone asked, their voice trembling with fear.
Granny May hesitated, her face growing even more solemn.
"There is a way," she said quietly. "A way to destroy it.
But it's not simple. The heart of the creature must be destroyed, the source of its power. Without it, it will be nothing. But where it is hidden, I don't know. I wish I did. I wish I could tell you how to defeat it. But I am too afraid to say anything more." Granny May's hands shook as she clutched her cane tightly. Her head bowed in resignation. The room was silent once more, the realization settling over everyone like a weight they couldn't escape. The creature was real. It had been born from darkness and bound to the very streets they walked on. It was growing stronger, feeding on their fear, and the only way to stop it was to find its heart and destroy it. But where was it hidden? And could they even survive long enough to find it? The people of Pasadena were no longer just afraid, they were desperate. Desperate for answers, desperate for a way out. And deep down, they all knew that the real nightmare was just beginning. It was the dead of night again when the final confrontation took place. The chill in the air was more biting than ever before, a constant reminder of the darkness that had overtaken Pasadena. The moon hung high in the sky, casting its pale light over the streets that had once been filled with life and laughter. Now, the streets were empty, save for the occasional stray cat or the fleeting movement of shadows that seemed to stretch unnaturally in the dim light. Maria, Jason, and Lily and Tom stood together, their breaths heavy with fear and anticipation. They had come this far. They had witnessed the terror, the destruction, and the endless suffering caused by the dark entity that had taken hold of their town. But tonight, they were determined to end it. They had no weapons, no powerful artifacts or spells to help them. Just the knowledge they had pieced together over the past few weeks. The entity had been born from an ancient curse, summoned by a group of cultists long ago. They had discovered that the creature's power lay in its heart, a heart that was hidden deep within the old church at the center of town. The creature, a being of darkness and fear, had fed on the terror of the townspeople for so long. Now, it was time to destroy it. Their steps were slow but determined as they ventured into the heart of Pasadena's abandoned district. The buildings were crumbling, windows shattered, and doors hanging loosely from their hinges, as if the entire area had been left to decay for decades. The air grew heavier with each step they took, and the growling, the whispers, they were all around them, louder now than ever before. It was as if the creature itself were guiding them to its lair, coaxing them in with its presence, knowing that they had come to end it. Maria could feel her heart racing in her chest. She had never been so afraid in her life, but she couldn't back down now, not when they had come so far. Jason walked beside her, his face drawn tight with concentration. He had seen the entity before, up close, and he knew how powerful it was. But he wasn't about to let it claim any more victims. Lily was just behind them, her hands shaking as she held a flashlight in front of her, the beam cutting through the darkness. Tom, the police officer, brought up the rear, his gun at the ready, though he knew that no weapon they had would stop the creature. It was too powerful for that. They had to find its heart, the source of its strength, and destroy it. But would they be able to? As they drew closer to the church, the air seemed to grow colder still, a biting chill that pierced their skin and numbed their fingers. The growling, which had been a low rumble in the background, now roared in their ears. The whispers intensified, each word like a sharp jab into their minds, telling them they were too late, that the creature was too powerful to defeat. Maria gritted her teeth and pressed forward, forcing herself to ignore the fear that threatened to overwhelm her. And then, as they rounded the corner of the church, they saw it. The entity was no longer the shadowy figure it had once been. It had transformed, grown, twisted into something far more terrifying. It was a massive, grotesque form, its body covered in the faces of its victims, each one screaming in agony, their mouths frozen in eternal horror. The faces seemed to writhe, contorting in pain, as though they were trapped in the creature's flesh, unable to escape. Its eyes glowed with a malevolent light, and its form shifted and flickered like a dying flame. The creature was enormous, towering over them, its presence so overwhelming that it felt like the very ground beneath their feet was trembling. For a moment, they all stood frozen, unable to move, mesmerized by the sheer terror of the thing before them. But then, with a collective breath, they snapped back into action. Maria stepped forward first, her heart pounding in her chest, her mind racing. She knew that they had only one chance to end this. They couldn't let the creature escape. She glanced back at the others, nodding silently, and they all moved as one, charging at the entity with what little courage they had left. The creature snarled, a low, guttural sound that reverberated through the air, and then it lunged at them. Its massive arms stretched out, and the ground shook as it swiped at them with unnatural speed. Tom fired his gun, but the bullet seemed to pass right through the creature, having no effect on its form. The growling grew louder, and the faces on its body seemed to scream even more urgently. Lily, her legs shaking but determined, grabbed a heavy pipe that had been lying on the ground, swinging it at the creature with all her might. It struck the creature's body with a sickening thud, but it didn't stop. The creature only seemed to grow more enraged, its eyes glowing brighter as it bared its teeth. Jason charged forward, his fists raised, but even as he struck the creature, he felt the heat of its power, the sheer force of its malevolence, pushing him back. Maria was nearly thrown off balance as the creature's shadow seemed to press down on her. But she kept her feet steady, moving closer to the altar at the center of the church. Tom followed close behind, his face a mask of determination. They had to find the heart. It had to be here somewhere. As they neared the altar, the creature seemed to grow weaker, its form flickering like a broken light. It howled, and the faces on its body twisted in pain, their screams growing more desperate. And then Maria saw it. Beneath the altar, hidden in the shadows, was a pulsating, blackened mass. It was the heart, the source of the creature's power. With a cry of desperation, Maria grabbed a jagged piece of stone from the ground and hurled it at the heart. The moment it struck, the creature let out one final, terrifying roar. The ground shook violently, and the church seemed to tremble with the force of the creature's agony. Its form began to flicker and twist, the faces on its body dissolving into shadow. As the heart was destroyed, the creature's form began to disintegrate, fading into nothingness, leaving only the darkness it had come from. The streets of Pasadena fell silent. The growling, the whispers, everything stopped. The town was still once again, as if the very air had exhaled a collective sigh of relief. But the victory felt hollow. The damage had been done. The scars of the Pasadena Midnight Massacre would remain forever, etched into the town's history. The people who had fought to stop the creature, to end its reign of terror, were left with the knowledge that they had survived. But at what cost? As the survivors stood in the aftermath, breathing heavily and covered in dust, they knew that while the creature was gone, the curse it had brought with it was not so easily erased. The darkness that had plagued Pasadena for so long was still there, lingering in the shadows, waiting for its next chance to return. And though they had defeated the creature, they could not undo the terror it had caused. The epilogue of Pasadena's nightmare had been written, but the story wasn't over. The curse though seemingly broken, would always remain, a constant reminder of the darkness that had once taken hold. And every so often, if you listened closely, in the stillness of the night, you could hear the faintest whisper, a reminder that the dark entity might have been defeated, but it was never truly gone.